I've been in a lot of cars with a lot of parents and their kids. And the conversations I love hearing. Did you have fun today? What did you learn today? What did you enjoy about today? What wasn't so much fun? The questions I hate hearing is, what about that tackle that you missed there? What was going through your mind there? Like, why did you? It doesn't matter. That kid knows better than you why they did that. They don't need to answer to you. Early specialization kills me. It's the biggest fallacy that's peddled by youth sports clubs and teams is you've got to play this sport year round. Increase the risk of injury, stunt your kids' global physical, physiological, and mental development, will lead to burnout. What I see in North America is a load of robots. Kids with incredible skills, but they can't think for themselves because everything is prescribed in the coaching section. We do this, 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 and then when you get on the field, we're going to do this, this, this. You don't need that at that age. Touches on a ball, create, be expressive. Do you think Cristiano Ronaldo spent his whole time being coached? No. I have a lot of friends with kids. It's funny that 80% of them have been told that their kid is really good and a high achiever and got great potential. Reel you into the system. We're telling everyone this, right?
The literal business of professional sports is not where Dr. Oliver Finlay imagined his career taking him, and yet he believes the degree to which business has infiltrated youth sports in North America is having a detrimental effect on the youth sports environment. Hey there, I'm Scott Rintoul, and like you, I'm a big proponent of youth sports, but I also know it has become something that many of us don't recognize. I strongly believe parents are a major part of the solution, so I created this podcast to give all of us access to world-class performers who share their insights, experiences, and perspectives on youth sports in an effort to improve the environment for all kids. Well, to say Dr. Oliver Finlay's experience in sport is diverse is a massive understatement. As an athlete, he took lacrosse as far as he could in the UK, but a lengthy professional career was not in the cards. Determined to work in sport, he became a physiotherapist before studying both sports medicine and human performance. The result has been working with almost every league and type of athlete you could imagine, from his time with F1 star Lewis Hamilton to becoming the VP of Performance and Sport Medicine for the Buffalo Sabres, to preparing athletes from a multitude of disciplines for the Olympics. He is currently the managing partner for Beautiful Game Group, a company he co-founded to unearth global investment opportunities in professional sport. But he has seen sport at every level, from the grassroots to the top of the podium, in multiple sports, in multiple countries, on multiple continents. And he's here to share that perspective with all of us on Better Sports Parents. Oliver, thank you very much for doing this and spending time with me here on Better Sports Parents.
Hey, always a pleasure to catch up, Scott. And I'm looking forward to getting into this because this is an area that, I've seen on both sides of the pond and at different levels. I think parents obviously do their best for their kids or what they think is the best for their kids. But sometimes they're misinformed. Sometimes they're persuaded by peer pressure. Sometimes they're we talked about it before, this sort of purveyance of the fear culture that my kid might get left behind. And it's very hard if you don't know what you're looking for to know what you're looking for. So I think this is a great podcast. And, some of the guests that you've had already have talked about some really critical stuff. And I think there are so many parents out there that will be benefiting from this. So great job. Keep up the good work.
Well, thank you, and thank you for contributing to this discussion. As you mentioned, you have a global perspective, and while you have operated for your career at the professional level for the most part, I would love to know, before we get this conversation underway, why youth sport is important to you.
Youth sport is important to me because if it wasn't for youth sport, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. It was everything for me as a kid. Literally, from the moment I got up in the morning, everything revolved around getting to school early to play football, soccer, getting through the morning classes to play soccer at lunchtime, getting home to, I had a small foam ball in my room. I had lacrosse sticks. I had basketballs. I put a basketball hoop up because I'm really tall. You just can't see it from this podcast. I'm really tall. Um, Tennis, archery, like you name it. I did everything. And whilst lacrosse was the thing that I eventually took on all the way through, I still love playing, pick up soccer. I live in Andorra now, and every little town has its own astroturf or field. And on a Saturday afternoon, there are kids from 9, 10, 11, adults up to 50 odd, and everyone just turns up, jumps in a seven-a-side team, and away you go. I still love doing that. It's just fun. And when I look at what it taught me away from sport, in terms of discipline, time management, setting goals, being part of a team, leading, taking responsibility for your own actions, all these sort of things. Youth sport has given me so much that now I use on a day-to-day basis in work and outside of work. So, yeah.
That makes two of us. That's a similar story, I think, to a lot of parents out there that see so much benefit in sport. You mentioned all of those lessons that you learned along the way. Was it explicit at the time that it was going to come out like that? Or is that something that now you look back on and gain just through trial and error?
I'll tell you a story. When I was 9, 8, 9, 10, I was painfully shy, like pathologically shy. And I wanted to get my first part-time job, as a kid does. So I remember my mum said, well, there's the news agents, they deliver papers. That will be good. Exercise, it'll get you out and about, just get you on the ladder of having a job and understanding, what that looks like. She said, go in and ask the news agents. I couldn't do it. And she said, look, here's some money. Go buy a Mars bar. And while you're there, ask the guy for a job. So I did that. And I remember like my mom being so patient and very encouraging. But now when I look at my business, it's built on a network of thousands of people. It's built on hundreds of people through pro sport, family offices, high net worth individuals. I spend my whole life s- talking to people that I've built relationships with over the course of 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years. And yes, I was a physiotherapist, which helped me grow confidence a lot and the ability to talk to people a lot. But I wouldn't have been there if I hadn't have had the lessons of being in a locker room, and playing team sports. And the fact that you're one of a crowd, you have to stand your corner, you have to communicate with people on and off the field, and it builds confidence. And so, when I look at what it did for my ability to communicate and give me confidence in my own ability to bring value to a team of people, you're not going to get that anywhere else.
I agree with you. And I think the people who watch and listen to this podcast agree with you and why it's the driving factor and why youth sport is so important to them as well. You described playing a wide array of sports when you were growing up. Was that self motivated? Was that your peer group? Or was that exposure introduced by your parents?
You know, it was a mix of things. Soccer, football, was just what happened in the playground. Along with British Bulldog, which got banned because kids got really hurt, but that was just what you did. Those were the days where as soon as class was finished or before school started, you weren't almost allowed in the classroom. Unless it was torrential rain, you were out in the playground and you were running around inventing your own games. There may have been a ball involved, there may not have been a ball involved, but there may be role playing involved, or there may be, setting each other little challenges, and you create your own games. And, you get home in that day and age, and I was down the local park. I was on the street, like go to friends' houses and there'd be cul-de-sacs and you'd be playing all sorts of Kirby or whatever. And so the first exposure, I guess, to football, soccer was through just that's what my friends did. And then athletics, I just was curious. Basketball was, I was probably early teens, and the NBA was starting to be shown in the UK, and Michael Jordan and Michael Johnson were around, and it was gripping, it was absorbing. So a few of our friends decided to join the school basketball program. I remember going to a local fair and seeing archery for the first time, thinking that looks really cool. So I tried that and did that for a couple of years. And then there were sports at school that they'd rotate through. So you'd start off with rounders when you were really young, which is like a mini baseball, but it would be rugby later on. And it was only later on that you had to specialize. But even then, the difference between then and now was when you had to specialize, that was still only a winter sport. And so in the summer, I was doing tennis, I was doing athletics because that's what school offered. And then I went to a tennis club. But again, I started tennis really playing in the local park, really poor tennis court, but it gave me interest and it gave me that first exposure to it. My parents never pushed me into anything. They always encouraged and supported me. Countless number of lifts to this practice, that practice. But school was very good, and so a lot of practices were at school. And I think my parents were great at just letting me explore each sport, but also instilling, if you're going to commit to doing that this year, you commit to it and you turn up and you show up. You're reliable. Reliability is funny. What I do in my business now, I didn't grow up in finance. I grew up in sport and I've learned finance. But the feedback I get from repeat clients is they like working with me. Part of it's because of my reliability. I do what I say I'm going to do when I say I'm going to do it. And I learned that through youth sport, and that those messages supported by my parents. So, turn up, work as hard as you can while you're there, commit to it, learn from it. You're going to fail. That's great. We'd rather you fail here when you're coming home to us as a kid, and we can help you learn the lessons of how to pick yourself up, rather than you don't fail and suddenly at 20 you're out and you're in the big wide world and you fail and you don't know what to do. So all these lessons, my parents were just parenting well, I guess, and realizing the lessons sport was teaching me and helping, you know, develop myself personally through the lessons peripherally to that when I got home.
What you've just described as a youth sporting experience, I think will resonate with people, certainly myself, because I'm in the same age band as you, but people that are of our generation, whether they grew up in England or North America, that sounds fairly familiar. But for me, having kids in youth sport right now, it's not really what I see. When you look at youth sport, whether it's in Europe or in North America, how does the environment now compare to what you grew up with?
Different Europe from what I see in Europe to North America. And I'm going to caveat that. I live in a country of 81,000 people, really small. Andorra is tiny. For those of you that don't know where Andorra is, look at a map, look at Spain, France, the Pyrenees in the middle. We're this little dot in the middle. Okay, so I walk out my door. I'm a 2-minute walk to my gondola to get on the mountain. The kids here is a bit like Whistler. 2 afternoons a week you're on the mountain, and that's school. That's school sports. What the government are very good at doing here, and this was the same when I was a kid back in the UK, is there's a lot of government investment in grassroots sports. So I can go home at any time of day pretty much. And as I said before, every commune, every little village town has their own sports facility. So I live in a little town called La Massana, about 4 kilometers from the capital. We have an AstroTurf soccer field with a little basketball court next to it and an outdoor gym. We've got another park with an incredible kids playground on it. There's another kids playground not far. There's a few paddle clubs and whatever that are pay for play, but pay for play here is not expensive. Like you're paying each $3.50 equivalent for an hour's paddle. Like it's nothing, and the rest of the stuff's free. So the government helps fund the Andorran Soccer Federation, the Andorran Football Federation, and they provide coaching after school, again, on all these astroturfs around, and it's free. Like the kids can turn up. They don't pay for anything. And so from a facilities perspective, everyone has access to sports facilities, whether you want coached or whether you just want to go down and pick up and play. When the kids go to school, as I say, everyone goes skiing. So again, it's not something that just the privileged do and the people that don't have the same sort of take home income can't do. Everyone does it. And here, sport and activity are just a way of life. The people that are originally from here, that's just what they grew up doing. And the people that have moved here probably moved here because they wanted to live in the great outdoors. And, it's also a very safe place. So we're lucky in the fact there is next to no crime here. If there is, it's a bit of petty theft. It's rare to have anything more than that. It does happen, but it's very rare. So people can leave their kids outside all hours, go down to the AstroTurf, and they know they're going to be safe. So that, we are lucky. We do have a lot of advantages that sort of precipitate that approach to sport. When I look across the water, it's a business. It's money, money, money. I I work in sport investment now, and I don't really do much in sort of grassroots investment. But the last figures I saw, I think there was a study that reckoned somewhere, and this is a big gap, somewhere between 30 and $40 billion are spent in the US every year by parents getting their kids to play sport. That's insane. That is bigger than any professional sport league revenue many times over. And so the problem with that is when it starts to become sophisticated and around business metrics, the pressures are there and the stakeholders are there that don't necessarily all have the same thing in mind. And, then you're looking at how many kids can we get through the door? How much can we get them to pay to get in the door? When they're in the door, what are the revenue streams can we generate? Is it kit? Can we travel? This, that, and the other. And suddenly then, yeah, some of that money, a lot of that money goes into facilities and making it look nice. And we've got the nicest kit, so other people want to come here. How much of that money goes back into coaching the coaches? Probably not enough, if we're being brutally honest about it. The things that's what really matters. I don't care if you've got the nicest looking facility. I didn't grow up with the nicest looking facilities, but it gave me access to play ball. And when I had them, I had some great coaches. And so I think, the money that's being spent is on not always on the right things. And there are going to be people out there saying, no, our coaches are great. And there are great coaches out there. But for the number of bums on seats, for want of a better word, they're trying to drive, there's probably not that depth of coaching. And then it's human nature. If you're a coach in that sort of system, you want to justify why you're getting paid to do what you're doing. And so I see overcoaching. I worked for the Football Association, which is the governing body, the soccer governing body in the UK for, early 2000s. And one of my remits was to work with some of the age group teams. So we under 15s, 16s, 17s, 18s, 20s, 21s. And I remember under 15s and under 16s, I worked with an incredible coach, a guy called John Allpress. And his background was a teacher. And even on international camps, he would break off a part of the training session and the kids would have to make up their own game. That generates creativity. That generates communication. That generates the thinking of an idea, communicating that idea with someone else and getting other people behind you. That breeds creativity down the road on the sports field. What I see in North America is a load of robots, kids with incredible skills, but they can't think for themselves because everything is prescribed in the coaching session. We do this, 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 and then when you get on the field, we're going to do this, this, this. You don't need that at that age. You don't need tactical awareness when you're 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Go out there, touches on a ball, create, be expressive. Do you think Cristiano Ronaldo spent his whole time being coached? No. Like, he spent time making up his own stuff. Like, that's the difference I see there is a difference, in my opinion, between soccer and football. Soccer is a very coached game in North America that is very similar to football. Football, it's part of you. Like, uh, the kids from my generation, the class of 92, whatever, they grew up playing football on the street. And it's not that you're playing it on the street, but there's no rules per se. You're governing yourself. You're making up your own rules. There's only 4 of us tonight. What are we going to do? Oh, there's a curb here. Oh, there's a pothole here. Like, you make up your own rules to adapt to the situation you're in. All our training fields weren't lovely smooth surfaces, with touch lines and whatever. It was jumpers for goalposts every lunchtime, and we want to play on this part of the field, but the bigger boys are playing there, so we're going to have to go around them there. And you make it up as you go along. You grow up with this spirit inside you, this creativity that I don't see many North American kids sort of have that same approach to a sport. It's very coached. They're big differences. There are big differences.
Yes, there certainly are. And you raise a number of key points that I want to touch on throughout this conversation. But let's start with the overall picture. It sounds like what you're describing in Europe, where you currently live, is a government that has said, we believe this is a fundamental right of the people. And this is leading to outcomes which, as you describe it, and again, this is my interpretation, that are healthy life, sport for life, whatever that sport happens to be. Whereas
Yeah.
what I hear you describe in North America is sport for the purpose of excelling at a particular sport, maybe with college or pro aspirations in mind, where there's a very finite goal as opposed to sport for life. Is that a fair characterization of the difference you see?
It it is, but here's something that's funny. And I wrote a note on this because this jumped out at me. There was a national youth sports strategy done in 2019 in the US, and you probably talked about this on the podcast before. And there was a national physical activity plan. They didn't say anything different. They said every kid from every walk of life and every corner of our society needs to be encouraged to play sport. So I don't think the general philosophy is any different. The difference is that seems to have gotten forgotten a little bit in North America. And again, I started writing down some fascinating figures as I was knowing I was coming in on it. And the discrepancy between parents earning 150 grand a year and what they spend on their kid playing youth sport, and those earning less than 50 grand a year and what they spend on youth sport, massively different. And so straight away, the barrier to access is incredible. And the other thing that jumped out at me as a stat is I went down a rabbit hole. I can't find the exact number, but the vast majority of kids in North America play sport for 3 years before they quit. What's that about? That's not encouraging sport for life. That's like, we're going to thrash you for 3 years, beat all the fun out of it. Another great stat that I loved: organized coaching sessions precipitate 47% less physical activity than unstructured play. What you and I used to do in the school playground with our mates playing football before school and after school and at lunchtime. And so I'm paying how much for my kid to go there and stand around half the time while the coach sort of, overcoaches my kid? Like, again, it sounds like we're getting a little too far ahead of ourselves and forgetting why we're putting a lot of these sports sessions on. And when you have to play and the facilities are very nice privately, the knock-on effect of that is governments think, well, we don't have to invest our money doing it because these private clubs are doing it. Problem is, there's a vast percentage of the population that don't have the ability to get into these private clubs to access these facilities. And so, I'm blessed when I look out my door here in Andorra and every kid's got access to anything they want, and it's night and day. There's a fraction of kids that are ever going to play sport professionally. When you look at 94% of female CEOs in Fortune 500 companies played competitive sport, that shows you the importance of what we're really doing here. We're supposed to be developing kids in a more rounded way alongside what they do with school. And that to me is being, these however much the US government spent on this national youth sports strategy and the national physical activity plan kind of seems to have been a bit wasted. They should have put that money into just, improving the quality of their local baseball diamond or their local grass field or, tennis club for everyone to use. I was at an event called Cannes Lions. So if you're from the marketing and media world, you'll probably know about it. For those that aren't, Cannes is the same place they do the Cannes Film Festival on the south coast of France. And the Lions is the equivalent of the Oscars for the media and the marketing world. So I was fortunate enough to go last year, and I was hosted at an event called Sport Beach, which was phenomenal. 5 days with incredible people. And I was involved in a small roundtable discussion that started off on women's soccer, but it got into a lot of youth sport as a whole. And there was a pretty famous music DJ who was in the room. And he was telling us, his kid, 8-year-old kid, loves football. Absolutely gets up in the morning. First thing he does is put his favorite football shirt on. If they try to get it off him to wash it, it's a struggle. And he's obsessed. And he said, unfortunately, he's rubbish. He's not very good at all. And he said, the problem is now, if you're not good enough to make the first 11 or maybe the first 15, you can't. He was in tears because you saw how much it meant to him and how frustrated he was that his kid may have been not very good, but absolutely loved the game. And he knew what he was missing out on in not being given a platform to play just for fun, because what would that do later on in his adult development? And so that was really powerful when you got someone that successful and that popular in tears about the dilemma he had with his son. And I think, you know, what we also miss is this intramural sport, these sports leagues. I think, in Vancouver, you've got the one for the sort of university and the adult population. I think that's a great, a great environment that they've created there. Um, we ought to be doing this for kids all the way through the years. I'm rubbish, but I just want to play for fun. I'm going to meet new people. I'm going to widen my social circle, and I'm running around. I'm not sat playing computer games. And when you look at the financial impact of, on the health system of sedentary lifestyles, when you go back and look at the research, the key habits are formed in childhood. If you're sedentary and overweight as a kid, you're not going to shake that. If you're active and take care of yourself as a kid, you're probably going to keep most of those habits through the rest of your life. That's before we get into the physical and physiological and mental development benefits of sport. And so I think there are some poor business decisions being made in vacuums and not realizing the impact of actually investing in grassroots sport earlier, that will give it access to far more people.
And what you're describing with the model where if you don't make the starting 11, you don't have a place to play is an up and out model. So if you're good enough, you go up. If you're not, you go out. And what we need are those recreational pathways. And I will speak to some sports in Canada in particular, we do better than others. Soccer, or as football, as you termed it earlier, is pretty good at that at the youth level because there are multiple tiers, there is recreational league, and so there is a place to play. And what strikes me when you say, well, my son, based on the comparative metrics being used, is rubbish. But it's only based on comparison. I might be a very good basketball player on my block, but I might be rubbish compared to an NBA player. But that doesn't matter as long as I have an environment where I can play. And it seems to me that the gap you describe is the one we're missing. Certainly in Canada overall, North America, I think, falls into this category as well. How do we establish more recreational pathways for what I would call the teenage years? I think it's pretty good at the lower level youth, and it's very good at adult level because there's a 5K or 10K or an adult volleyball or soccer league you can be a part of. But these teenage years, when there is so much going on in terms of identity formation, we're missing out. How do we correct that? Because Canada is struggling with this, Oliver.
Again, I don't know. I don't have the answers. I can see what I've seen in other places. What I think the problem in North America is contributed to is the lack of collaboration between stakeholders. So you have the government, you have the schools, you have the club teams, you have the parents, you have the kids, you have the coaches, you have corporate, and on and on and on. And they all seem to be fighting their own battles rather than saying, how can we come together and really create something special? And other countries have done it. Don't get me wrong. This isn't, record, groundbreaking stuff. We're not reinventing the wheel here. But I think, look, the business ecosystem in North America is so strong. So use it, leverage it, sponsorship, brand awareness, bring those dollars in. Those companies are going to get access to parents' eyeballs, but just, you know, take a different approach to it. And I think the government has to say, we'll match whatever the corporate put in so that there's pressure both ways. I think the clubs and the coaches have to stand up as well and say, you're in a privileged position here. Some of this money has got to go into a pot that every year you do a certain amount of coach education. Now, one of the biggest differences I saw in North American sport, you can be a David Beckham, but you're not stepping one step onto a football field, soccer field coaching until you've been through your coaching badges. So I actually did my first soccer coaching badge and my first lacrosse coaching badges at the age of 11, 12, I think. I was by far the youngest on the team. Now, it was wonderful at the time because it actually improved my game because I understood the game better. I broke down the techniques and, that was a great thing. But if I wanted to go to the next level and, take sessions on my own, I had to do the next level. And then if I wanted to coach older kids, I had to do the next level. So by the time you're coaching in the lower professional tier, you've done your A license. If you want to coach in the Premier League, you've got to have done your pro license. And these courses are a year, 2 years long. You have to have done a certain number of hours. An American football player, US football player, can walk off the pitch and start coaching the next day. Doesn't have to do any coaching qualifications. So his understanding of teaching, pedagogy, basic physiology, basic anatomy, basic, what does a physiotherapist do? Basic psychology, all these things that you're taught, and more so as you go up the levels. So I used to, when I was at the FA, another one of my roles was I would go and teach on these B licenses, A licenses, pro licenses from a physio perspective. And I'd have a sports scientist, strength and conditioning coach with me. We'd have the doc, we'd all contribute. So we're not expecting pro coaches to be doctors, physios, sports scientists, but they have to know the basics, what's dangerous, what to do in case of emergency, and actually what are these people that are in my support team, what can they do for me? Like, how can they help? And so you start to build a collaborative coach from the outset. In North America, that structure and those systems and processes aren't the same at all. And I think that is, I heard a saying, the sports ecosystem in the US is programs rich but systems poor. And I think when you start to look at it from that angle of things, you have a lot less qualification in your coaches, and a lot less experience from the coaches, and a lot less pressure for these coaches to be well educated than you do in other parts of the world. Now, there's not to say bad coaches don't get through the system in Europe, and that good coaches don't get through the system in North America. That's not what I'm saying at all. But the vast majority and the norm is far different, and that's a problem.
Something that you just mentioned really strikes me as well, and it was that teaching component and pedagogy component. Because what I currently see, especially in a country that relies a lot on volunteers to coach, is that we overemphasize tactical acumen and underemphasize relationships and teaching. Do you see the same thing? And what should that balance actually look like? Because I'm really still thinking about that story you told of that teacher that you worked with early who may not have
Yeah.
had the same tactical acumen, but he
Oh, he
understood
did.
how to
I mean, he was
connect.
an international coach, right? And he's still doing that. The best coaches I've worked with have all come from teaching. You know, I've worked with some excellent coaches that didn't, but some of the best ones all had a background, even if it was a couple of years, 3 years in teaching. And you see how they challenge kids. It's in a very different way. Now, I was a coach. I coached a lot of lacrosse growing up, but I had the good fortune of being coached and working with some great coaches that I was able to steal some of those lessons. Most coaches have used, as you've said, are volunteers. They don't have that exposure to other really good coaches. And so they're just understandably making it up as they go along. But this is, for me, where the clubs and the local authorities have to step in and say, you have to do X amount of hours per year on coaching from, you know, this set of topics, and it might be pedagogy, it might be session planning, it might be the psychology side of things. But too many coaches start coaching and then never continue their education in it, which to me sounds crazy. We're trying to develop kids, and if we're not developing ourselves, what example are we setting right there for a start? And I think then when you look at some of the other problems in youth sports related to burnout, and we touched on that, the average of the majority of kids playing just 3 years, are those coaches, you know, aware of the factors that create burnout and why they're losing these kids? Maybe, probably not. So if we're not educating the coaches how to create an environment that helps retain these kids, is it any surprise that we lose them? If they take the fun out of it and just over rely on tactics. I mean, you asked the question, what's the balance? What should the balance be? Well, that depends very much on the individual kids you've got in front of you, the age they are, the background they've got, the educational level they've got, what their end goal is. If you've got a kid that's just playing for fun, there should be zero tactics in there whatsoever, right? Or next to zero. If you're, working with 17, 18-year-olds that want to go pro and they're at that elite level, okay, you're going to have a significant amount of tactics in there. But it's horses for courses. But if the coaches aren't being educated as to know where to put that needle, and they start coaching tactics to 12-year-old kids that aren't really that good and will benefit from a lot more time running around and just touches with the ball, you know, you're wasting your time because they're never going to use it. They're just going to be bored, and it's going to add to that 47% of the time that, they're standing inactive when they could be running around.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And yes, there comes a point in time and there comes certain group of children that are pushing toward the top of that sport pyramid. Yes, the competition, the results, they are going to matter more. But for the bulk of that pyramid, they don't matter as much as we think they do. And I don't know if it's
Competition does
just,
matter.
pardon me?
It's a I think competition matters
Yes, of course.
because I mean, I play paddle now, and I'm competitive as hell. I'm not very good. I'm learning learning the sport, but the fact that it's competitive keeps me coming back every time. And competition is a life skill, right? What are you going to do when when you turn up in the workplace and it's results orientated? So I think competition is important as part of any of it, but the tactics stuff and what you're competing on maybe isn't quite as important as you say as we think it is sometimes.
Yes, but if you and I have a conversation, your metric for your evaluation of paddle is much different than, well, let me tell you, I won 2 matches and I lost one, and here were the scores, and here are the great shots I had. That's not the conversation we have.
Right.
I went and
Yeah.
paddled for an hour. I played paddle for an hour. I had a great time. I got a sweat in. I feel better
Yeah.
about my day. That's
Yeah.
what we're measuring.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think too often in youth sports, that's not what we're measuring. What was the result? What were your standings this year? That's how we think, in many cases, 11-year-olds should define success or failure as opposed to, oh, I had a great time. I want to return to this sport next year. Oh, I had a great coach who helped me develop this, and that. I made friends. I see an overemphasis on that too early. I see a professionalization of youth sport too early in North America. Do you agree? And how do we convince more clubs, if you agree with that, that what they're measuring isn't what they ought to be measuring?
Parents have got to take a good deal of responsibility here. You know, as we said before, parents want what's best for their kids. But I've seen it with my own friends who are very well educated people that athletes themselves that work in the medical profession. And when they tell me what their 11, 12-year-old daughter's just been involved with in a soccer program, I'm like, would you let anyone else's kid do that? Like, that's verging on child abuse. Like, the number of games they played. I get playing a tournament on a weekend and playing a load of games, but then they're playing another day the next day, and then they're playing again 2 days later. Now, coming from my physical and physiological background, education background, I know what that's doing to a tendon right there, and you're increasing the risk of tendinopathies and, insertional tendon problems like severs. Disease. So parents have to get back to thinking, what is this really all about? This is for my kid's development. All right. And when we look at a kid's development, is it best suited to early specialization, which has become a huge thing in North America? Is it? No, it's not. Right. You know, each sport challenges you in different ways, physically and physiologically. And so that variety of load is very important for a developing musculoskeletal system. A repetitive load isn't great. That's when you get overuse injuries, stress fractures, severs, tendinopathies. When a club turns around or a coach turns around to a parent and says they've got to stop doing all their other sports and just do this sport, the parents have got to stand there and say, is this the best place for my kid? And if the club's saying, if you want to be on the travel team, you're going to be traveling to the next state that week and we're going to stay in hotels that are stipulated by the league because there's a backhander going there. Why does a kid need to travel that far when there's great competition just down the road, probably in the same city, you know, probably in the neighboring district, maybe even in their own district? So who are we doing this for? And are we really letting them get away with this for ego purposes, financial gain purposes? And so for me, the parents have got to take more of a stance. Look, when we were kids, certainly when I was a kid where I grew up, if I wanted to play football for a team, I played for my village team and then I played at school. Now it's or we could go to that team, or we could go to that team, we go to that team, we go to that team. We're going to start this year in that team. No, we're going to go to another team because they. So are we moving the kid because it's an ego thing? It looks better for us if our kid's going to the other team. Is it the kid's struggling in this team, so let's move them to another team? Well, is that teaching them how to deal with failure and how to deal with difficult situations? Probably not. Well, the coach is offering us something else to go to that team. Again, what are we in this for? You're in this to help your kid develop beyond sport. Yes, sport wise, but also beyond sport. And so, are you looking at a short, immediate benefit? And we want the kid to play on the best team because we want him to be best now. He's 12 or she's 12. Or when they're 17 or 18 and they've played soccer for part of the year, hockey another part of the year, baseball another part of the year, is their physical and mental ceiling actually going to be a lot higher when they're 17 or 18? And it's interesting. When you look at the NFL international picks and the NBA international picks, most of those kids didn't start playing organized basketball or organized football until they were 19, 20, 21. They went to high school and college in the States and then got picked up in the system in the later stages of the draft. These kids didn't even play the sport, never mind specialize in the sport, until they were in their late teens, early 20s. So if you're telling me the only way to get to the top, physically and physiologically, is by specializing in one sport, baloney. Now, is the system created to make it more difficult to be recognized for playing a high level of that sport if you haven't gone through the right teams? That's a different question. And so when I go back to my friend in the US, she's like, but if she doesn't play on this team, she won't get recognized. And she wants to play professionally. She wants to play in the NWSL. So we're kind of hamstrung. And as you said, the clubs peddle the fear, right? And they just help, you know, embellish this storyline that the only way to do it is this way. Believe me, some of the best athletes I work with played so many sports. One of the best rugby players I ever worked with, he was a high level skier. He was a high level trampolinist and rugby. And he also did a hell of a lot of surfing, which in Scotland, that was it's icy cold. But, he, in his spare time away from training, the coaches wouldn't know, but I'd know he'd go surfing. So, that kid was so adept as an all round athlete. He was so creative on a rugby field. His skills were incredible because if plan A didn't work, he had plan B, C, and D informed by other movement patterns that he learned doing other sports. I think the system scares parents, and parents aren't strong enough at saying, this is what I want for my kid. Where can I get this? And almost interviewing the club. You tell me why my kid should come here. I want to see good coaching. I want to see them play in a league that has a good standard of refereeing. It doesn't need to be amazing refereeing. And my bane is when you see youth sport and the parents hurling abuse at the referee. That referee wasn't there. There will be no game. So does it matter if they got the decision wrong? No, life's not fair. That's a lesson to learn now for later as well. So, but I think they need to you need to look beyond the nice kit and the nice clothes and the nice swag, as we call it in the UK, and the nice facilities, and say, how good's the coach? What is going to be asked of my kid on a weekly basis and from a travel basis? Is it really a good idea that they have to spend 5, 6, 7 hours on a coach? No, not necessary.
Well, and part of the reason I think that we've lost the plot overall, I'm talking in general, I'm not talking about everybody. We have missed the fact that most people are recreational and they can be good recreational players, but that's what they are for their life. They are not quote unquote high performance athletes and they are not elite athletes, which is the top of what we're talking about in terms of world class athletics. part of the reason is because of what you described. Well, hey, if they don't get into this quote unquote high performance environment when they're young, they won't come out as high performance or elite athletes later. You have worked in high performance your entire life. What is high performance and when does it actually start in terms of athlete development?
High perform. This is a great question and one I've heard so many answers to over the years. For me, it's paying attention to every detail and performing at your best at the times when you have to perform at your best and knowing when actually you need to not be high performance. You can't be high performance 24 hours in a day. It's not possible. You'd physically and mentally burn out. So you have to know when to back off and relax. For me, high performance can start at the age of 6, 7, 8. In, have you prepared your bag properly for practice tomorrow? Are you going to be on time? Have you got the right food in your bag for after training? Have you got enough hydration there? Do we know what that hydration does? Do we know why we're doing this? Building those good habits for me is high performance, and that can start very early on. But if you're talking high performance on tactics or stuff, way later on, you know? But the high performance lessons that can be taught at a young age, they're the ones that will carry over throughout that person's career, their later life, when they become parents themselves. And they can start from the get go, you know? Can you fail like a high performer? What does that mean? Something didn't work out. Okay. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm now looking at it and reflecting on what went wrong. And I'm thinking about how I would do things differently next time. Great. Going to need that at school. You're going to need that in the office. You're going to need that when you're a parent. Those things can be taught straight away. It's funny. I've been in a lot of cars with a lot of parents and their kids. And the conversations I love hearing. Did you have fun today? First one. What did you learn today? What did you enjoy about today? What wasn't so much fun? The questions I hate hearing is, what about that tackle that you missed there? What was going through your mind there? Like, why did it doesn't matter. That kid knows better than you why they did that. They don't need to answer to you, you know? But sure, encourage a really healthy conversation around, why was that fun? What did you enjoy? You know, you took some responsibility there. Well done. Where did you learn that from? Was that something we did at home? Was that something you learned on the football pitch? Great. Let's see more of that. Like, as you say, we're developing little human beings to be big human beings. And sports are a great ecosystem to do that.
It certainly is. And one of the things you have focused on in your career is culture. And I think what is advertised as culture isn't always what good culture is. I'm talking good culture here, but everybody wants to say they've got a good culture. And when you put it on a poster or you send out an email or advertising, it's generally marketed as our teams succeed. We had this player, that player, and the other come through our system. The inference being if your child comes here, they have a chance to do that.
Right.
I don't necessarily think that reflects good culture. I think that's a very superficial measure. What to you in youth sport is good culture and how do parents recognize it?
When it comes to culture, there's one thing writing words on a wall, and there's another thing living a culture. And I think I've mentioned this to you before. You're going to get a culture, whether you like it or not. If you're unintentional about it and you don't know what you're doing, you're going to get a culture. It'll probably be a bad one. If you're intentional about building a culture, then you've got a good chance of getting a good one. The key things when it comes to culture is people have to understand what it is, people have to buy into it, and people have to feel some degree of ownership towards it. So, what do we stand for? Well, as a youth development team, it's not about winning trophies. We stand for, I don't know, using sport as a way to develop young people physically, physiologically, and psychologically. Something like that. That message needs to be lived throughout every email, every poster, every coach interaction, every member of staff interaction with the kid, with the parent. you name it. The values and the behaviors that underpin that need to be shared values. So at the beginning of the season, the coach ought to be sitting down with the kids and saying, what behavior do we as a group feel is unacceptable or acceptable here? Okay. You've had ownership of it. You agree. So that now, if I call Scott a rude name and we've agreed that name calling isn't an acceptable part of our culture, you can turn around and say, Scott, we agreed as a group. Oliver, you called Scott a bad name. There is a penalty for this. There's some degree of a response that we have to make to it. From a values perspective, what do we stand for? Well, we stand for, I don't know, working hard when we're here, being on time, setting joint goals and working hard as a team towards them, uh, inclusivity, and 5 things that the kids know and they can recite backwards, the coaches know, the parents know. So then if the kid misbehaves at practice and the coach says, look, Mr. Intel, we've got a problem. Unfortunately, your son, you know, did this. The parents know we signed up for that. The kid signed up for it. He was part of identifying that value code and he breached it. So I've got no leg to stand on to argue with you. That happened. And we understand that's not part of what we do. So these things are fundamental. And if a culture's well done, the kids can police it themselves. If they're encouraged, right? It's not the coach having to say, don't do this, don't do that. It's Scott throws one off by not chasing back for a ball. Ollie can turn around and say, Scott, that's not what we agreed. We agreed we were all going to work hard for each other. I got your back up there. Our standards are we get our back here. And that's part of our culture and we build that. That's no different than a Premier League team or an NFL team or an NBA team. We're just learning those lessons early on and we can take that to the workplace. It's no different than being in the staff room at a school and it's a load of teachers and that's the standards that we adhere to here that we've all agreed upon. So those things are a big part of culture. What's written on posters, if that's not lived and shared and spoken to in every interaction, it's not culture.
Well, and this is where the nuance of the conversation comes in because when you talk about those things, which I agree with, and those are the broader values that I want, certainly for my children, I want those for every kid I coach or interact with. And as a parent, as part of an organization, that's what I want my organization to stand for.
Yeah,
Hear that and they say, oh, well, you're not into winning or you just want participation trophies for. No, 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 no. Those two things do not have to be mutually exclusive. One is a purpose, one is an objective. The objective of the game is to try to score more points within the confines of those 40 or 60 or 90 minutes, whatever game we happen to be playing. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. However, I, as a parent, want to know if your number one value is winning at all costs, I should know that going in. But that also has implications. Okay, that means if you as a parent group, if you as an organization say we're going to try to win no matter what, that means a bunch of kids aren't going to play. Are you okay with that? Is that what you're signing up for as a parent? Because if we're just trying to win, if that's all we want to get out of this season, you're signing up for something I don't think you realize you're signing up for.
agreed. And particularly when you're talking about 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old kids, you all know what's going to happen. If it's win at all costs, the big kids are going to play, the little kids aren't. And when you look at some of the best athletes that have come out of this, some of them have been late developers. So you're prepared to lose that kid who could be better than any of the big kids because when the big kids get to 17, 18, 19, stop growing, and the little kids that caught up overtake them, that's a problem, isn't it? You over-indexed on the early developer who isn't necessarily going to be the best kid all the way through. So it comes back to, again, you've got to be able to identify the key reason we're doing youth sports is to develop young people through the medium of sport. And some of them may go on to be pros, some of them may not. But just because a kid's an early developer, should he get more game time than a younger kid? No. No, sorry, a kid the same age that's a later developer? No. But again, too many teams that are over-indexed on winning will pick the big athletic kid at the expense of the late developer.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And really, what we should be trying to foster is a love of the game. And one of the things I think parents miss in this when they get that gleam in their eye that maybe someone told them their child was special, or they're an early developer that has success and they think, well, hey, this is something he or she loves. Maybe this could be a career for them. They miss all of the other surrounding ecosystem of sport. You and I are very good examples of this. Neither of us is a professional athlete. However, we've developed a lifelong love of sport that keeps us active, and we literally work in sport as a result of developing a love for it at an early age. When you look at whether it's youth sports organizations or even professional organizations, what are the actions they take that lead to those types of outcomes?
When I look at youth sport, I've got a lot of friends with kids. I don't have kids. I have a lot of friends with kids. It's funny that 80% of them have been told that their kid is really good and a high achiever and got great potential. Reel you into the system. We're telling everyone this, right? And it, again, is like marketing to people with pain or people that have got no money. If you feed on saying, you come here, we're going to give you the answer, you'll take it, often with very little evidence. And I think when coaching becomes more about the ego of come play for me and come here and your kid will be amazing and I'm going to coach it. No, 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 no. But that's what happens. And when you get, you know, so much money being spent and being very competitive, and then private equity starts investing in it and ultra high net worth start investing in it, people will start to look at different metrics. We're encouraging the wrong behaviors. It's funny. At the higher levels, if I look at the English soccer academy system is probably at the moment one of the best youth systems in world soccer. And they don't make the same mistakes. They invest heavily on coaching and coach education. Yes, they invest in facilities, but the kids aren't playing soccer, football the whole time. My friend was head of academy strength and conditioning. They were doing taekwondo, they were doing dance, they were doing cycling. They did all sorts of sports. And this is a Premier League team, their academy system. So if they're not doing it, there's no need that raggy ass Rovers in the third tier of BC soccer needs to be, doing the whole time, spending the whole time on football. Again, it comes down to the level of education that these coaches have to have attained before they get the coaching badges, that they understand, you know, the development of the neurological system a little more, or they at least know where to ask to get advice on it. They understand the development of the musculoskeletal system, or at least know where to ask to get advice on developing their pathways that way. And again, when you don't have that understanding, that's where you get the prevalence of overuse injuries. That's where you get the prevalence of burnout, and losing kids after 3 years of playing sport. I mean, that's craziness, absolute craziness.
We're at an inflection point in Canada right now. We've had the Future Sport Commission come back and say system needs to change, investment from government should increase as well. I know that they haven't called you, at least as of yet, to advise them, but if you were to give the Canadian government any advice in those two areas, how do you change the system and where should you invest the money? What advice would you give?
Coaching the coaches, put a load of money there, and access to public sports facilities. Allow kids to go use those facilities like we have here. The gate's always open. People respect it, take care of it. There's no graffiti down there. It's clean. The toilets by the side of it are open and unlocked 24 hours. No graffiti. It's safe. There are kids on there when I think kids will be at school. I don't know what's going on, but they're just 3 or 4 kids. They're doing their own little session. they're just playing 2-on-2, whatever. They're using those facilities when there are no coaches there. And on the flip side, when there are coaches there, the sessions are appropriate for the skill level and the age and the physical development of that kid. And it's, you know, it's policed, it's governed. It's, those coaches have got to do a certain amount of education every year, and they have to pass exams before they're allowed to go anywhere near a coaching session. And then they have to be mentored as well. So I think those are probably the two biggest bang for your buck. The facilities don't need to be amazing. They need to be safe. They don't need to be a certain size. It can fit to the size available. Kids will make up the rules. Kids will adapt. It doesn't matter. It can be really small. It'll improve their close skills. It can be really big. It'll help improve their cardiovascular system. And then I think the other thing is, again, it comes down to education, really. The development of a kid, and are the rules appropriate for that kid's development? So heading at an early age is not being taught in soccer, I think, up to under 12 or under 14 now in the UK, because they realized there was a link between a potential causative link between early heading and later neurodegenerative diseases. But there's, so maybe research to support that. And I would say, look, it's not all bad news. I would say if we look at the changes, the access that girls have now is getting better and better. It's not great. It's definitely better than what it was. There is an understanding that boys and girls have different physiological, and psychological pathways and development speeds. And so there's an understanding that there has to be an awareness that coaching needs to be different from a certain age. So things like that are improving, but there's a hell of a lot of room to go at. There's a hell of a lot of ceiling to be fought for yet.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's worth fighting for, which is why I do this podcast. And I think sometimes that gets lost in the messaging, is that we're having this conversation because we believe in the power of sport and because we want to fight the good fight, but we want to remedy some of the issues that exist. And to your point, when Jumpstart came out with its state of play, its most recent one, yes, far more access for girls now, more girls playing sport. Not where it should be, but we're getting there. Yet on the financial side, 6 out of 10 parents in this country are using some form of financial coping to pay for their kids' sports. That's got to change with access. I've outlined a couple. I certainly don't want to lead the witness, but I do like to ask this question toward the end, and it's maybe the most difficult one. Oliver, when you look at youth sports today, what do you consider the biggest issue in youth sports?
It's hard to pick one, but again, coming from my background, from both the medical side of things, but also from sports development, early specialization kills me. It's the biggest fallacy that's peddled by youth sports clubs and teams, is you've got to play this sport year round. Increase the risk of injury, stunt your kids' global physical, physiological, and mental development, will lead to burnout. There's something great about coming to the end of the season and going, that was a great season. Right, what am I doing now? Right, I'm excited for the start of a new season in a different sport. You lose that and it just becomes mundane and a drag and something I feel I've got to do, and I'm on a conveyor belt. That's no way to keep kids entertained and keep kids in the sport, no matter how driven they are.
You're right. We've given them a job at a young age instead of something they're dreaming to do.
Exactly. And with any task, if you're doing it because you love it and it becomes interesting and someone turns around and says, I'll pay you to do that, then it becomes a job. Yeah, not so much fun now. So as soon as you're doing it because you love it, but then the fun's taken out and, we're doing it and then it continues. No surprise, burnout so high.
Oliver, fantastic conversation. I really enjoy getting the global perspective from you. I always enjoy your insight, and I know the audience will benefit from it as well. Thank you for spending this time with me here on Better Sports Parents.
Thanks for the invite. Always fun. Always fun.
I I hope you enjoyed this episode and you found some tangible takeaways that you can bring with you in your journey to becoming a better sports parent. The best way for you to support this podcast is for you to subscribe, follow, rate, review, and drop us a comment on whichever platform you're watching or listening. And the fastest way for us to grow this podcast and reach more parents out there is for you to share it with your respective networks and to tell people that you see at your youth sporting events when you're there with your children. Big thanks to Lightstock Music and Andre Diaconou for the music on this podcast, which is a production of Toolkit Content. Until next time, happy sports parenting. And remember, have fun out there. That's what it's supposed to be about.